Sophie's 7th birthday was supposed to be balloons, cake, and laughter. Then Derek Hartwell opened his mouth, loud enough for a 7-year-old to hear, cold enough to make her freeze mid-laugh. Every adult in that backyard looked away. Every single one. Except Ethan. He set his glass down, slowly walked across the grass, and looked Derek dead in the eye. "Don't speak to her like that." 7 words. No shouting. No threats. Just 7 words that made the entire room go silent. The question is, which her was Ethan really protecting? The house on Clearwater Lane wasn't much to look at from the street. The porch railing still needed a second coat of paint, and the oak tree in the front yard had dropped a branch during last spring's storm that Ethan never quite got around to hauling away. But step inside, and the place told a different story. Bookshelves filled with picture books and chapter books standing side by side. A kitchen table with mismatched chairs that had been painted in 4 different shades of blue, because Sophie couldn't decide on just one. A small mudroom where 2 pairs of boots sat near the door, one large, one small, both caked with the same dried creek mud from Saturday mornings at Riverside Park. Ethan Cole had lived in that house for 3 years, ever since the divorce was finalized, and Lily flew to London with a one-way ticket and a promise to call every Sunday. He was 32 then. He looked older now, not in a tired way, but in the way that men do when they've learned to carry things without hunching. He worked from home most days, architectural drafting for small residential projects, furniture commissions when the money got thin, and Sophie went to Millbrook Elementary 4 blocks away. Tuesday afternoons he coached her soccer team. Friday evenings they made homemade pizza and watched whatever animated movie she'd picked out that week. It was a small life. He had built it carefully, the way he built everything. 2 years earlier, when Lily had asked him quietly without drama, sitting at that same kitchen table, whether he would keep Sophie. While she figured things out abroad, he had said yes without hesitation. He understood even if he didn't say so. Lily had spent her entire childhood being shaped by the Hartwell name. Private schools, country club, memberships, a mother who treated every family dinner like a board meeting, and every daughter like a line item in a legacy plan. Lily had fought against it her whole life, and then she'd married a carpenter and proved Margaret Hartwell right about everything she feared. The pressure never stopped. By the end of their marriage, Ethan could see the exhaustion behind Lily's eyes every time her mother called. He could see it, and he still couldn't fix it. So when she said she needed to go, and that she wanted Sophie to grow up somewhere normal, somewhere, without the weight of the Hartwell dynasty pressing down on every childhood afternoon, Ethan said yes, because he loved his daughter. And though he had spent 2 years training himself not to think about it, because he had never quite stopped loving Lily either, he did not tell Sophie that her mother was coming to the birthday party. He told himself it was to avoid disappointment in case something changed, in case Lily's flight got delayed, or she got cold feet at the last minute. But the truth was simpler and harder than that. He wasn't sure how he would feel when he saw her, and he wasn't sure he wanted Sophie watching his face when he found out. The party started at 2 in the afternoon on a Saturday in early October, when the air had just enough chill in it to make the backyard feel like something out of a magazine. Carol, Ethan's mother, had arrived at noon with a trunk full of paper streamers and 24 orange and gold balloons, because Sophie had requested a fall birthday theme with the same intensity most kids reserved for Christmas lists. Carol was a compact, practical woman in her early 60s who wore reading glasses on a beaded chain around her neck and had very strong opinions about store-bought frosting. She and Sophie had been frosting the homemade cake together for 40 minutes, both of them deeply serious about the spacing of the candy pumpkins along the top edge. Sophie's school friends arrived first, a noisy cluster of second graders, who immediately discovered the leaf pile Ethan had raked against the fence and destroyed it within 4 minutes. Parents stood near the back porch holding cups of apple cider, making the comfortable small talk of people who see each other twice a week at pickup. Ethan moved between them easily, refilling cups, keeping an eye on the kids, checking the time, with a casualness he did not feel. And then, just after 2:30, the back gate opened. Lily Hartwell walked into the backyard in a dark green jacket and jeans, carrying a wrapped gift tucked under one arm, her dark hair shorter than he remembered, and her face carrying the particular composure of someone trying very hard to look at ease. She stopped just inside the gate and scanned the yard, and when her eyes found Sophie red-cheeked and shrieking with laughter in the middle of the leaf pile, she went very still. Not frozen. Still. The way a person goes still when something they have been missing for a long time is suddenly, unexpectedly right in front of them. Ethan watched her from across the yard. He did not move toward her. He did not look away. Sophie hadn't seen her yet. For a few seconds, the world held its breath. Then Carol appeared at Ethan's elbow, with the quiet efficiency of a woman who had watched her son carry things too long. She pressed a fresh cup of cider into his hand. "She looks well," Carol said. It was not a question. Ethan took a sip of cider and said nothing. He hadn't decided yet what anything meant. Then the back gate opened again, and the afternoon changed. Margaret Hartwell didn't knock or call ahead because Margaret Hartwell did not operate that way. She came through the gate in a cream wool coat, with Derek at her shoulder, carrying a gift box wrapped in silver paper and wearing the pleasant, controlled expression of someone who believed that arriving somewhere uninvited was simply a matter of confidence. She was 60 years old and looked 50, with the kind of upright posture that came from decades of knowing exactly where she stood in every room she entered. Derek was 36, taller than his mother, and less subtle about everything. He smiled at the children in the yard, the way people smile at things they find mildly inconvenient. Ethan set his cup down on the porch railing. His jaw tightened, once, then settled. Margaret made her way across the yard with the unhurried confidence of a woman who had never been asked to leave anywhere. She reached Ethan first and extended a gloved hand. "Ethan." She said his name like a category. He shook her hand. "Margaret." She looked around the yard with a measured smile, taking in the paper streamers and the leaf pile and the children with juice stains on their shirts, and she said, "What a sweet little setup, so cozy." The word cozy landed the way she always meant it to land. Ethan didn't react. He had 2 years of practice with this particular tone, and before that, 4 years of marriage into it. He knew what it cost to answer and what it cost to stay quiet, and he had gotten very good at choosing the lesser cost. Lily had crossed the yard by then and was crouching in front of Sophie, who had stopped mid-run at the sight of her mother. The little girl stood completely still with her hands at her sides, and then something unlocked in her face, and she ran the last 3 steps and wrapped both arms around Lily's neck. Lily held on with both hands, her eyes closed, her chin resting on Sophie's shoulder. Around them, the other children kept running and shouting. The parent conversations kept going. But Ethan stood at the edge of the porch and watched, and across the yard, past the heads of 24 people who didn't know what they were looking at, Lily opened her eyes and looked directly at him. He held her gaze for 2 seconds. Then one of the school dads asked him where to find more napkins, and the moment passed. Derek had stationed himself near the food table with the ease of someone who was used to occupying space without being invited to. He made polite, dismissive conversation with 2 of the other parents, the kind of conversation where everything he said implied something adjacent to what he actually meant. Ethan kept him in his peripheral vision without appearing to. Sophie came running over, dragging Lily by the hand to show her the birthday cake, and Carol handed Lily a plate with a slice of coffee cake and said, "We're so glad you made it," in a voice that was 100% genuine and 0% complicated. Lily smiled at Carol with something that looked like relief. "Thank you for taking such good care of her," Lily said quietly. Carol waved a hand. "She takes care of us too. That's just how she is." For a while, the party held. Sophie opened presents, surrounded by a crowd of 7-year-olds who had opinions about every single item, and the noise level reached the kind of pitch that makes adults instinctively raise their voices and then wonder why their throats hurt later. Ethan managed it all with the practiced ease of a man who had run 100 such afternoons alone, refilling juice boxes, mediating the brief but intense dispute over who got to sit on the good lawn chair, making sure the grandmothers on the other side of the yard had everything they needed. He moved through the afternoon like a man who knew his house because it was. He didn't hear it start. He was at the far end of the yard retrieving a soccer ball that had gone over the fence when he turned back and noticed that the configuration of people near the old oak tree had changed. Derek had pulled Lily away from the group. They were standing near the hedgerow at the side of the yard, partially screened by the branches of the oak, and Lily's posture had changed. The relaxed ease she'd carried for the last hour was gone. Her shoulders were back and up the way they used to get when she was steeling herself for something. Derek had his hands in his pockets and was speaking in a low, even voice, the kind of voice that Derek used when he wanted to be certain he wasn't overheard, but also certain he was understood. Ethan couldn't make out the words from across the yard, but he didn't need to. He had seen this conversation before in various forms over 5 years of watching the Hartwell family operate. He started walking toward them. Not quickly, steadily. He was halfway across the grass when he heard it. Derek's voice, just slightly too loud the way it got when he grew impatient with keeping up the pretense of being reasonable. "You came back fine, but don't make this into something it isn't. The girl is doing well enough here. You want to be in her life, that's your right. But don't start thinking about pulling her back into anything. The family doesn't need another round of that particular experiment." He paused. "She doesn't fit the profile, Lily. You know that. I know that. Let's not pretend otherwise for the sake of some sentimental homecoming." What Derek did not see, because he was not in the habit of paying attention to where children were, was that Sophie had left the group of her friends 3 minutes earlier to get more juice. The back porch was behind the hedgerow. To reach it, she had cut through the side of the yard directly behind where Derek and Lily were standing. She was 7 years old, and she didn't understand the word profile or know what a sentimental homecoming meant, but she understood tone the way all children do with a certainty that bypasses language entirely. She understood that her Uncle Derek was talking about her. She stood behind the oak tree with her juice cup in both hands and her face completely still. Not crying, just still. Lily had seen her. The expression on her face shifted just barely, a tightening around the eyes, a brightness that was not happiness, and she started to say something. Derek cut her off. "Lily, don't do that thing where you make this into a moral argument. You always do this. You always make it." He stopped because Ethan had arrived. He had covered the last 20 feet of grass without hurrying, and he was standing between Derek and the hedgerow, now his back to the tree, his face to Derek. He had picked up his glass from the porch railing on the way past, without thinking about it, and now he set it down on the nearest flat surface, the edge of the garden border, with a small, clean sound. The people nearest the oak tree heard it. A conversation somewhere behind them paused. Ethan looked at Derek for a moment without speaking. Derek was taller and had the practiced ease of a man who was accustomed to controlling the terms of every exchange he entered. But he was also a man who was very rarely looked at the way Ethan was looking at him right now, not with anger exactly, but with a kind of complete and unambiguous refusal. "Don't speak to her like that," Ethan said. 7 words. His voice was level. There was no heat in it, which made it land harder than heat would have. The backyard went quiet in the way that outdoor spaces go quiet. Not all at once, but in a ripple, conversation by conversation, until the only sound was the distant shout of 2 children who hadn't noticed anything yet. Derek stared at him. Behind Derek, Margaret had materialized from somewhere near the food table, her face arranged in the smooth, careful expression she used when something threatened to become a scene. "Ethan," she said, with the tone of a woman extending the last reasonable hand before things became unreasonable. Derek found his footing. "Excuse me," he said. His voice had gone very quiet. "You're not her husband. You haven't been for 2 years. Whatever happens in my family is not—" "Your family said something in front of my daughter," Ethan said. "So I'm going to say something back." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't step forward. He didn't have to. From behind the oak tree, Sophie watched her father with very wide eyes. The silence in the backyard lasted another full second. Then, 2 of the school moms began a conversation near the porch with the deliberate energy of people who had decided collectively that the polite thing was to look elsewhere. The school kids sensing something without knowing what drifted toward the cake table. Margaret moved to stand beside her son, which was how she always positioned herself when she wanted. It understood that Derek was not speaking alone. "We came here today to celebrate our granddaughter," she said. Her voice was smooth and entirely false. "Nobody is trying to cause any difficulty. We're simply having a family conversation." The word family was precise and deliberate. It meant you are not in it. Carol appeared at Ethan's side the way she always did when she sensed her son moving toward a cliff edge. She had come from the kitchen with a dish towel still over one shoulder, and she put her hand briefly on Ethan's forearm. Her touch was light, but her intent was clear. "Ethan, honey." It was 3 syllables, and they contained everything: the old worry, the old caution, the voice she had used on the phone 2 years ago when she told him it might be time to let things go. The same voice. He felt it land the same way. He did not move. Lily stepped forward. She had been standing apart for the last 30 seconds, in the particular stillness of someone who has spent a lifetime watching others manage situations she was responsible for. She looked at Carol. "It's okay, Mrs. Cole," she said. "Let Ethan talk." Carol looked at her, a long, searching look, and then slowly took her hand back. It was in the economy of that backyard a significant thing. Margaret's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Derek was watching Lily with the expression of a man who had just had the floor shift under him. Sophie, from behind her tree, watched her mother with the same wide-eyed focus she usually reserved for particularly important moments in animated movies. 3 days later, an envelope arrived at Clearwater Lane. Ethan was in the kitchen drafting when it came the ordinary kind of Tuesday afternoon, when the house smelled like coffee, and the neighbors' leaves were finally coming down in earnest. He opened it at the kitchen table. He read it twice. Then he set it down on the surface of the table with both hands flat beside it and looked out the window at the oak tree in the yard for a long time. The Hartwell family had filed for a custody review. The grounds as prepared by their attorneys cited inconsistent income, inadequate educational environment, and documented absence of extended family support network. There were 7 pages. Every page had been designed by someone who was very good at their job. He did not tell Sophie. He told Carol, who sat across from him at the table and read the document with the careful attention she brought to anything that mattered, and said nothing for almost a full minute afterward. Then she set it down and folded her hands. "What do you need?" she said. Ethan leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling. "A lawyer," he said. "Probably a miracle." Carol unfolded her hands and picked up her phone. He met with the attorney, a direct and unhurried woman named Patricia Greer, on a Thursday morning while Sophie was at school. Patricia reviewed the filing and explained the landscape in the measured tones of someone who had navigated it many times. The Hartwell resources were substantial. Their legal team was experienced. Without a strong counter-presentation and the active cooperation of the child's mother, the outcome was genuinely uncertain. "I want you to understand that," Patricia said, "not to frighten you. So you make good decisions." Ethan drove home from that meeting with the windows down, despite the cold, because he needed air, and he needed to think, and he was not yet ready to be inside four walls with this information. He had built everything carefully. He had shown up every day. He had cooked the dinners and been at the games and sat up through the ear infections and the night terrors and the 3-week phase where Sophie refused to eat anything that was not beige. He had done it without complaint and without asking for acknowledgement, because it was simply what you did when someone was yours to take care of. And now, a family with 7-page legal filings and expensive attorneys was going to tell a judge that it wasn't enough. He pulled over on Elm Street 2 blocks from home and sat in the parked car for 4 minutes. Then he drove the rest of the way home, went inside, started dinner, and when Sophie came through the back door at 3:15, trailing her backpack and a detailed report about what Addie Myers had said at lunch, he listened to all of it. Lily came to Clearwater Lane on a Wednesday evening, 8 days after the party and 5 days after the envelope. Ethan had not contacted her. He had decided with the same quiet discipline he applied to most things that what happened next had to be her decision without any pressure from him, and that he was capable of respecting that, even if it cost him. He was on the porch when she pulled up, sanding the railing he'd been meaning to finish for 6 months, and when she got out of the car, she looked at him across the front yard and said, "I didn't know about the filing." He kept sanding. "I know," he said. She came up the porch steps and sat down on the top step with her coat still on and her hands around her knees. He kept working. After a moment, she said, "I found out 3 days ago, from my own lawyer." He set the sandpaper down. "You have a lawyer." "I do now." They sat on the porch together for 2 hours, which was the longest they had been in the same place, without other people present in 2 years. Sophie was asleep inside, and the street was quiet in the particular way of residential neighborhoods at 9 in the evening. Distant traffic. Someone's dog, the orange streetlight on the corner, doing its steady work. Lily talked about London, not the parts she had written in the Sunday. Calls the office, the organization, the things that sounded like purpose. The other parts, the apartment that was always too quiet. The Sunday mornings where the calls with Sophie ended and the silence that came after was a specific kind of weight. The understanding arrived at somewhere in the second winter that leaving had not fixed what she had hoped it would fix, because the thing she had been trying to fix was not a location. Ethan listened without interrupting. He had always been a good listener, which she had sometimes mistaken during their marriage for passivity. She understood now that they were not the same thing. "I left because I thought I was protecting you," she said. She was looking at her hands. "I thought if I stayed, the Hartwell thing would never stop. My mother, Derek, they would just keep pushing until you either gave in or we destroyed each other fighting them. I didn't know how to win that and keep you two." He was quiet for a moment. "You didn't ask me," he said. It wasn't an accusation. It was just a fact, placed on the table between them with care. She looked at him. "No," she said. "I didn't." The porch light flickered once in a brief gust of wind. "I let go because I thought I wasn't enough," he said. "My mother told me you deserved more than what I could offer. She said it because she loved me and she was scared. I believed her because I was already scared too." Lily looked at him for a long time. "We let other people finish sentences we should have finished ourselves," she said finally. He picked up the sandpaper from the railing, turned it over in his hands once. "Yeah," he said. "We did." That night, for the first time, nothing was resolved or declared, but something that had been sealed for 2 years was open again, the way a window lets in cold air, and you realize the room has been closed a long time. Lily said goodnight at 11 and walked down the porch steps, and Ethan stood at the door and watched her go. She stopped at the end of the path and turned back. "I'm going to tell the court exactly what I came back to say," she said. "All of it." He nodded once. She turned and kept walking. He stood in the doorway a moment longer, then went inside and locked up, and the house was quiet around him, in a way that felt for the first time in a while like stillness rather than absence. The hearing took place on a Thursday morning in November. Judge Patricia Weiss was 60 years old, methodical, and gave every indication of being someone who had heard elaborate arguments from expensive attorneys before and knew how to weigh them accordingly. The Hartwell legal team presented their case over the course of an hour and 15 minutes. They were polished and thorough, and they had documentation for everything: Ethan's income reports, a consultant's assessment of the school district, a report from a financial planner estimating what it would cost to provide Sophie with equivalent opportunities to those available through the Hartwell resources. It was impressively constructed. It had the texture of concern and the architecture of a transaction. Patricia Greer presented Ethan's case in 40 minutes. She called Sophie's pediatrician, who described a child in excellent health with no signs of stress or instability. She called Sophie's second-grade teacher, who described a student who was curious and well-adjusted and particularly good at explaining things to other kids who were struggling. She submitted 3 years of school reports and 2 letters from the soccer coaching staff. She did not use the word adequate or the word sufficient because she had told Ethan on their first meeting that the standard was not adequacy. The standard was what served Sophie best. Then Lily was called to testify. She sat in the witness chair in a dark blue blazer and spoke clearly and without notes. She explained the circumstances of the custody arrangement in her own words, with no softening and no deflection. She said that she had asked Ethan to be Sophie's primary parent because she believed then and now that he was the most stable and devoted presence in their daughter's life. She said that the Hartwell family's concerns about environment and resources were not concerns about Sophie. They were concerns about influence, and that those were not the same thing. She said that in 2 years of watching from across an ocean, and in the weeks since her return, she had never once seen Sophie in anything less than excellent hands. She looked at the judge when she said it, not at the attorneys, and not at her mother, who was seated in the gallery, with her posture impeccable and her expression controlled. "My daughter is safe, happy and loved," Lily said. "Everything else is beside the point." Carol Cole took the stand after Lily. She was the last witness called. She smoothed her jacket, adjusted her reading glasses, chain out of habit, and looked at the judge with the quiet attention of a woman who had spent 60 years being underestimated and had made her peace with it. She said that she had encouraged her son 2 years ago to step back from his marriage. She said that she had done it because she loved him, and because she had misread the situation, and because she was afraid he would be hurt. She said that it had been wrong of her. She said it simply without performance, and it landed in the room the way true things do without requiring any supporting structure. "My son doesn't do anything halfway," she said. "He never has. Sophie doesn't go without anything she needs. Not love, not time, not safety. The things on those forms." She nodded toward the documentation on the table. "They can be counted. What Ethan gives her can't be." Judge Weiss issued her ruling 40 minutes after the close of testimony. She denied the petition for custody modification. She noted in her written findings that the submitted evidence did not demonstrate any material deficiency in Sophie's current environment, and that the petitioner's case rested heavily on comparative resources rather than demonstrated need. She recommended no further filings, absent a substantive change in circumstances. She was formal and precise about it, as she was formal and precise about everything. And when it was over, the Hartwell legal team gathered their documents, and Margaret and Derek left the courtroom without making eye contact with anyone. Ethan sat at the plaintiff's table for a moment after they had gone. Patricia Greer was already gathering her materials. He thanked her. She told him he was welcome, and that Sophie sounded like a remarkable kid. He said she was. He meant it the way you mean something that has no bottom to it. Outside the courthouse, the November air was cold and clear and smelled like wet pavement and wood smoke from somewhere down the block. Carol hugged him on the steps without saying anything. She was a woman who knew when words were beside the point. Lily stood a few feet away, hands in her coat pockets, and when Carol released him and stepped discreetly away toward the parking structure, Lily looked at him and said, "It's over." He put his hands in his jacket pockets and nodded slowly. "For now," he said. She smiled just slightly. "For now," she agreed. They stood on the courthouse steps for a minute without speaking, which was a different kind of silence than the silences of the past 2 years. Those had been absences. This was just two people standing in the same place, breathing the same cold air, with the same child, waiting at home. He picked Sophie up from school that afternoon himself. She came through the double doors at 3:15, with her backpack hanging off one shoulder and a permission slip in her hand, and started talking before she had fully descended the front steps, which was normal. She had a lot to say. She always had a lot to say. He listened to all of it on the walk home. Something about a science experiment involving celery and food coloring, and a disagreement about the rules of a game at recess and whether it counted as cheating. If you didn't know, the rule existed. When you broke it, a philosophical position she had clearly been developing all day. He weighed in on the celery situation and stayed neutral on the cheating question, which made her groan in the satisfied way of someone who had expected exactly that response. When they got home, Lily's car was in the driveway. Sophie registered. It looked up at Ethan, and then back at the car, then back at him with the calculating expression of a 7-year-old doing arithmetic that had nothing to do with numbers. "Is she staying for dinner?" Sophie asked. He looked at the car for a moment. "I'll ask," he said. Sophie considered this. "You should ask," she said, with the decisive authority of someone who had thought it through and reached a conclusion. She went up the porch steps, first pushed open the front door, and called out into the house. He came up the steps behind her and paused at the door with his hand on the frame. The kitchen light was on. He could hear Sophie inside already talking, the way she always talked, when she had more to say than time. He stood there for a second in the cold air. Then he went inside. That evening, the four of them, Ethan, Lily, Sophie, and Carol, who stayed because Sophie asked her to, and because Carol was constitutionally unable to refuse Sophie, anything had dinner at the kitchen table with the mismatched blue chairs. Sophie did most of the talking because Sophie always did most of the talking, and the conversation moved through celery and food dye and birthday leftovers, and an extremely detailed recap of a story Sophie had been writing at school about a horse who could solve mysteries, and nobody said anything that was particularly important or particularly profound. They were just people at a table passing the bread, keeping up with a 7-year-old's narration of the world. Afterward, when Sophie had been put to bed and Carol had gone home and the dishes were done, Ethan and Lily stood in the kitchen in the particular quiet of a house after a long day. And she said, "I'm not going back." He was putting away the last of the glasses. He turned around. "To London." She nodded. He looked at her for a moment. "Okay," he said. It was not a small word. It was just a small word. Some things don't end with declarations. Some things end with a kitchen light on at 9:30 at night, and two people who know each other's silences better than anyone else's words, standing on the same side of the room for the first time in 2 years. There was no dramatic speech that night, no grand gesture. There was a glass put away on the right shelf, a light switched off a door quietly closed. There was the ordinary and extraordinary fact of two people not leaving. The house on Clearwater Lane held all of it, as it had always held things steadily, without fuss the way a good house does. Outside, the oak tree in the front yard was bare now, its branches dark against the November sky. The branch from last spring's storm was still there at the base. Ethan made a note to himself, as he had many times, to clear it. This time, he thought he actually would.